This is the story of what some people call the miracle crop. The soybean has tremendous versatility and is the world's foremost provider of protein and oil. And in an era when the United Nations has called for a 50% increase in food production by the year 2030, well, the little soybean has a big job. In Search of the Four-Bean Pod is the story of how today's farmers are doing all they can to create healthy, high-yield crops while employing conservation practices to meet the needs of future generations. In Part 1, we introduced you to the face of farming and explained how generation after generation of family farmers have provided food and other products as a result of their hard work and dedication, and they couldn't do it without the land. For most people, currency is cold, hard cash. But for the American soybean farmers, well, their currency is their warm, rich soil.
Currency is our land, and what makes that land valuable is the topsoil, or that part of the soil profile where the nutrients are and the microorganisms, and so the black dirt, the topsoil. And we have to protect that. And our land is flat to gently rolling, to some of it is fairly rolling. When we have rain events, heavy rains, we have soil erosion. Our most vulnerable time is in the springtime when there is no plant cover. So we try to retain all the residue from the previous crop, and we also employ practices on the land that help keep the soil in place when we do have those big rain events.
Keeping the soil in place and ensuring that it is full of nutrients and live organisms, that's one of the daily jobs of a farmer. That's why the farmers constantly work to improve conservation through practices such as no-tilling, which is gaining popularity. No-tilling means, in part, that the farmer doesn't plow plant residue from previous crops underground.
I think no-till and tilled environments both have a place. So there's a reason to do tillage, and there's a lot of good reasons not to do tillage.
The bottom line for this currency is that farmers invest a lot into learning about and practicing sustainability and land conservation. They strive for best practices, knowing that what works well in one part of the country may not mix well with the soil of another region.
We have instances where we have to do some minimal tilling. We employ a tool called a Kelly diamond harrow, and it basically just kind of levels the ground. It's very minimal. It disturbs the topsoil very minimally, leaves the residue back on top, kind of like a blanket, to protect that valuable topsoil that we have to grow a crop.
With no-till, you actually have less weed pressure because those weed seeds lay on top of the soil. They do not have the opportunity to get mixed in. That's not to say this is a perfect science, but it does help cut down your weed pressure, if you will. So it's just another side benefit to no-till.
The topsoil, that's the organism that's living. It's a living, breathing thing. Without that topsoil, crops would grow, but they wouldn't thrive. We have to have that topsoil. We have to have that living, breathing thing, because a plant is a living, breathing thing, and so that environment needs to stay in place on the field so that we can maximize our yields, and we can get the very best out of the land that we do have. They don't make any more topsoil. It takes 100 years to build an inch of topsoil if you do everything correctly. So that topsoil that we do have, we have to keep it in place, and it needs to stay on the land.
That's why the nation's soybean farmers have placed a priority on sustainability. Since some of these practices have been added, an estimated 1 billion tons of topsoil has been preserved, along with the accompanying savings in fuel consumption and emissions. In addition to conservation tillage, crop rotation ranks high with today's farmers as a means of promoting sustainability.
We like crop rotation as one of our conservation practices, so we grow corn, soybeans, and wheat, some alfalfa in there, and occasionally sunflowers and peas. So we like to work with Mother Nature and have a little diversity in there. Certainly corn, beans is much easier, but we like to have that diversity in there for conservation reasons, as well as it spreads out our workload and the risk.
The result is acre after acre of healthy topsoil that produces a healthy, abundant crop.
I would like to think I can take a small degree of credit for that because of our no-till farming practices and our conservation practices that we do use. But our soil is not really all that deep, but it is fairly good quality. The limiting factor for us usually is rainfall. So we do have fairly good soil, and we try to plant these cover crops as well as our crop rotations for diversity in the crop rotations and so forth. So we like to mix it up, if you will.
I'd say that we're taking excellent care of the land just for the fact that we've increased our yields, we've increased the organic matter within the soil, we're applying less nitrogen, less fertilizer to get the yields that we're getting. We're constantly doing everything that we can to improve our bottom line, but yet be aware of the consumer and what they say, and take care of our land because we want to make a living for ourselves and also for the next generation.
Conservation tillage is known to help reduce soil erosion, reduce wind erosion, reduce runoff, reduce water loss, reduce fuel use, and generally improve soil health by increasing the organic matter in the soil. All you have to do is look for the earthworms. Improved soil health means there is a healthy earthworm population. The land is nurturing. When you take care of it, it takes care of you.
Conservation is very important to our family here because my kids are the fourth generation farming here. So obviously we want to leave the soil as well as everything attached to it in better condition than it was when we started. Dealing with conservation and the ability to farm here, you have to think long term, and I'm very, very fortunate that my father as well as my grandfather did think long term about the sustainability of the farm here that we live on, and we want to make sure that the next generation has the same opportunities that we have had.
We're here to make a living, and we don't want to ruin our land by over tilling or over farming, and so we're constantly aware of our surroundings and taking care of the soil to better improve our yields and with less herbicide, less insecticide, to be sustainable and have it ready that the next generation can take over.
The statistics tell the story of what has happened in recent years thanks to conservation practices. 93% decrease in soil erosion, 1 billion tons of topsoil preserved, 70% reduction in herbicide runoff, and a reduction of more than 300 million pounds in CO2 emissions. In short, the preservation of topsoil can lead not only to increased yields and healthy crops, but also to a better wildlife habitat for long-term resource protection. Farming is all about the land. So how do today's farmers work the land, especially when they're farming thousands of acres? What, besides land conservation practices, can they do to bring about those healthier crops and higher yields? How do they get to that elusive four-bean pod? Some of it, actually a lot of it, has to do with the new technology tools that are in the farmer's hands. We'll take a look at that in episode 3 of In Search of the Four-Bean Pod.